Shane Waldron has already started the search to fill out his offensive staff, and we break down a stat that makes you feel a lot better about Shane Waldron next on the Unbearable Sports Podcast.
We're going to take the North and never give it back.
So that's a good pick. You get the corner. I got to go bold, right? I got to go bold for this.
Yeah, she's got some nice.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron. Make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube. It helps the channel out so much. So make sure to do that and rate the show 5 stars everywhere you get your podcast. We're getting so close to our 58 5-star reviews out there on Apple Podcasts. And when you rate 5 stars, you will be in the running for a Darnell Wright jersey. Just leave a comment as you would like to out there on Apple Podcasts with a way that I can get in touch with you if you end up winning the jersey. But what's going on, everybody? It's been a great week so far. It feels like for Bears fans, there's been so much Bears news, Bears information out there today, all about Shane Waldron, talking a little bit more about it. So on Monday, I broke down who I thought was going to be on the staff and really where I thought that the staff would kind of go and what some of the options are. If you haven't watched that or listened to that, please do so. This kind of recaps some of what I was already thinking about, because on that show, my guess was that the Bears would probably bring in Greg Olsen, Chad Morton, and Sanjay Lal. I felt like that was kind of the most likely. But the biggest question mark on that quarterback's coach. So what we heard on Tuesday, though, is that Shane Waldron is already interviewing candidates, which is great to hear. And the people that he has brought in for the interviews are people that he knows well. And that's kind of like what my guess was when we were talking about it on that show of who would he probably be bringing in, who would he want to see out there. And the 3 people, Kerry Joseph, Chad Morton, and Sanjay Lal. I didn't talk much about Kerry Joseph, but I want to kind of break down a little bit on each one of those coaching candidates. And I kind of want to start with the big name. This is actually someone that I didn't know too much about until doing research for the coaches show and then the show today. But Sanjay Lal, a little bit about him. He's actually from London, England, and also has been around football for a long time. He was a high school passing game coordinator and wide receivers coach from 96 to 2002, and then was wide receivers coach at Los Medanos College in 2003, went to St. Mary's as the quarterbacks and strength and conditioning coach, went over to California for 2 years as an offensive assistant and quarterbacks coach, then goes over to the Oakland Raiders as a quality control coach from 07 to 08, 09 to 11 was wide receivers coach. Then goes over to New York Jets from 12 to 14. Then wide receivers coach at the Bills. Then wide receivers coach at the Colts. Then wide receivers coach at the Cowboys. Then offensive assistant at Seattle Seahawks. Wide receivers coach at Jags. And then last but not least, 2022 to present, passing game coordinator and the wide receivers coach over at the Seattle Seahawks. That's a huge resume, an absolute huge resume. He's 54 years old. And if you haven't seen much about that, he's a wide receivers coach. And I think that he's a great option for that wide receivers coach position because, he's not like developing Tyler Lockett or anything like that, but this was a good wide receiving core at Seattle. And especially since he was working with Shane Waldron and was their pass game coordinator, I think that he has a very good option to be that passing game coordinator, but at the least just be that wide receivers coach for the Chicago Bears offense. So I think that would be a great hire because he already knows who he is. He wants to bring in people that he feels comfortable working with. And then next was Chad Morton, who he's interviewing right now, the running backs coach and run game coordinator. And a little bit about him. He was a football player from 2000 all the way over to 06, but then as a coach was a coaching administrator at the Green Bay Packers at 09, and then from 10 to 13 as a special teams assistant for the Packers, and then moved over to the Seattle Seahawks as their special teams assistant, their running backs assistant, then eventually was the running backs coach from 17 all the way to present day, but then became the running game coordinator from 22 to present. So he's someone, yet again, run game coordinator and pass game coordinator, it makes sense for a offensive mind like Shane Waldron to want to bring those people over just to give them some familiarity and feel safe, right? He knows these people, he understands these people well, so why not bring them over as part of the squad? But there's a stat, part of the stat actually doesn't look too favorable for a Chad Morton, but just so in case anyone's curious, Chad Morton is 46 years old as well, so kind of in that middle age rather than older or too young, but still relatively young, I guess, when you're talking about a coach. But let's go over to the last one. The unknown is Kerry Joseph. Before we get into the statistics, Kerry Joseph was actually a quarterback for a very long time in the Canadian Football League, or he was a London Monarch for a while, Rain Fire, then he was in the Seattle Seahawks from 99 to 2002, then Ottawa Renegades, Saskatchewan Roughriders. He was a quarterback around just all of the world, basically. But as a coach, was a training camp intern for the Saints in 2014. Then at McNeese State was from 16 to 17 was a co-offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach. Then was a training camp intern, another intern over at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then at McNeese State went back as an interim head coach, co-offensive coordinator, and quarterbacks coach. That's one heck of a title. Goes to Southern Louisiana as a running back coach and passing game coordinator, then goes over to the Seattle Seahawks in 2020 as an offensive assistant, and then was the assistant wide receivers coach in 2021, and then the assistant quarterbacks coach to Greg Olsen for the Seahawks 2022 to present day. So Kerry Joseph interviewing might be the assistant quarterbacks coach, might be the actual quarterbacks coach. I think that's an interesting one. But I know that, like what I was mentioning before, Greg Olsen would be a nice veteran presence that has done this for a very long time if you want that person in the room. But obviously this is his staff, and Greg Olsen might want to be an OC somewhere else. He's done this forever. But also this is still very, very early on. Greg Olsen also interviewed for the Bears job. Maybe he has a little bit of sour feelings and he wishes that he was the OC. So maybe out of spite might not want to be out there as well. We don't necessarily know, but I did mention this at the other show. I do think that the quarterbacks coach, I could see them interviewing more people, not just hiring the first person, not just hiring Kerry Joseph just because he understands them. I could see him trying to interview a handful of other people. Zach Robinson would be glorious. Cliff Kingsbury would be headline worthy, but I really highlight Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator for the Kentucky Wildcats. I don't have the exact salaries of a offensive coordinator in college versus a quarterbacks coach in the NFL. I would assume that would be pretty close to one another, but I think Liam Cohen, he knows Shane Waldron. They know each other, and that's where I think that partnership could be a really good deal. And also Marcus Brady, I can't really see that too much, but just wanted to throw that out there. Someone that understands, that knows Matt Eberflus. But let's get into what the headline was. The main concern that a lot of people had, or one of the concerns that people have with Shane Waldron, because we've talked about this unfortunately, and I don't like showing this slide over and over again, and it keeps growing a little bit. But there's been a handful of concerns with Shane Waldron, like any offensive coordinator. As fans, it's our job to hate our offensive coordinator. Even when an offense is humming, it's all the praise goes to the quarterback, all the hate goes to the offensive coordinator. That's the way fandom works. Like really, that's what happens. But let's talk about just some of the concerns, or we don't have to go through the entire list, but the main one that I wanted to highlight was when we're talking about he's really a pass first type of a person. And that can be concerning because this is a running system. It's about establishing the run and then running play action and doing stuff like that. But when you look at how his running game performed with him as the offensive coordinator, a lot of Seattle Seahawks fans point to that and say, we had the 11th best rushing attack when he first came in, and then it downgraded to the 18th. Then at the final season this last year, it was 28th. So the running game was going down. The passing game was getting slightly better, So that's not a good view. Like, if someone can't run the football and it's getting progressively worse, don't you feel bad about that? But let's talk a little bit deeper. So first part, I want to at least bring up the yards per attempt. When you look at the yards per attempt while he was as the offensive coordinator, they were third in the year. They were third his first year, seventh the next year, and then it was 11th the following season. Still very good numbers, very efficient numbers for yards per attempt. But let's get into the actual statistic, because this is pretty darn cool to see. And this is from Arjun Menon, who is an analyst over at PFF. So whatever someone has to say about PFF, this isn't about the grades. This is actually about this is a stat about how often a team's running back runs into the intended gap, and then what type of success do they get when they actually run where they're supposed to run. So this is basically saying when they call a running play, does the running back actually hit the hole and go to the correct spot? And when you look at this graph, kind of the average is about 85% of the time people are running into the intended gap. That's kind of the middle of the chart. The Chicago Bears last year was a little bit less than 86%. Where were the Seahawks? They were all the way at the end for the rate of running into the intended run gap, all the way down at 74%. The next closest was a little bit over 79%. So when you think about that, that's terrible. The running backs were not hitting the proper gaps. They were not going where they needed to go. Now, we were just talking about this before. Chad Morton might come in as the running backs coach. That gets me a little bit nervous then, going, okay, why don't they understand what hole to run through, right? Because if you're trying to open it up, why aren't they going through that? But if you remember again, when we were talking about Shane Waldron likes to run a lot of zone concepts in his running game. And when you look at who he has at the running back position, Zach Charbonnet was someone that got a lot of the carries this year. And when I see Zach Charbonnet, I liked him coming out of college, but he was a big gap system running back. And for those that don't know, a gap system is really you get one hole and you just run, right? It's very simple. You really don't have to be trying to figure out where to go. While in a zone system, a lot of times you have to find the correct hole, the proper hole, and run through that. And it's really a lot of vision. So you need a lot of vision in a zone system, something that Charbonnet really did not excel at inside of college. So that's why you might have seen a lot less people kind of hitting the proper hole and hitting the proper gap. But then the next piece that's actually very favorable towards Shane Waldron. When you look at the success rate when running into the intended run gap, the number one team was the Seattle Seahawks at about 47%. The next highest was at about 45%, being the Bills, the Denver Broncos, the Rams, and the Ravens. The Bears are around 43%, just for those that are curious. So what does this show? To me, what this shows is that, hey, the running attack was just not efficient. So does that alleviate all my concerns about Shane Waldron, and does that make me feel better? A little bit. But at the same time, bringing in a Chad Morton does get me a little bit nervous, because now I hope that one of the Bears media people asked them, so why were you guys so inefficient at running the football? Right? And if you're bringing in Chad Morton, why is that? Because I do think you can put some blame on a lot of these players, because a lot of the players that they had were more of that zone, or not necessarily zone, and wanting to find the specific gap. But it seems like we've said before, he knows how to write up plays. He knows how to draw it up. It's just on the players to execute his plays the way that he wants them to be ran. It's like a lot of offensive coordinators, but it really does seem that's kind of his mentality, because he is a great play designer. But also, fun fact too, just from the rushing attack, if anyone's curious, they were fourth in big plays rushing percentage. So 13%, the highest big play rush. So, or the fourth highest. So pretty darn good at hitting some of those big home run types of balls. But let me know what you think down below. Are you still a little bit nervous about Shane Waldron as the offensive coordinator, hopefully this helps out and we went through some of those people that he's already interviewing. It's great to see, and I expect them to be interviewing a lot more. And you already know we're going to keep you covered with all the news that you need out there. And make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube. And with that, Unbearable Sports Podcast, we are out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair and